when you look at a process and you look at a global process, you look at something that's cosmic, God's plan for the world, for the cosmos, it's just a lot bigger than us. And so I think sometimes people look at it, they look at what's going on, they look at cancel culture, they look at Biden, and Harris in the White House, or they look at the Equality Act, or the different things, the transgender movement, social justice, critical race theory, entering into schools, and they look at these things and they say, man, that seems to fit the pre-mill persuasion. We're shining, just kind of, shining brass on a sinking ship. Things are going to get worse and worse and worse, but we're going to win in the very end because Jesus is our pinch hitter, and he's going to come in and, and he's going to win the game for us. He's going to take over, and but I think part of the reason is because we're so self-centered, and we think in such small ways, and we often just think about ourselves, and so I think it's kind of like, like a team can win a game, but an individual player have the worst game of his life. You know what I mean? It's like as an individual player, I might have a bad game, but the team still wins. And just like stock prices, there's dips and spikes, but gradually going up. And so I think it's good for us just to remember that. I thank God for our nation. I thank God for America. I think it was, I know it was founded on Christian principles, and that's why we have things like freedom of speech, and we have the thoughts, and the writings of guys like John Locke and the founders and Adams and all these kinds of things. And so I'm grateful for that. But at the end of the day, Christ and his eternal plan, his kingdom, it's not contingent on any one individual. It's not contingent on any one nation. And the idea that we might be having a rough spell, or we might be, the fact that the other team scores a point doesn't mean, hey, well, I guess we just quit and throw in the towel. It's not promised to be a shutout. The other team, darkness has its moments from time to time, and it'll get a couple points on the board from time to time, but it's slow. It's that mustard seed that you were talking about. It's the leaven. I remember one of my friends, he said, that the kingdom of God, it starts small, it grows slowly, and it becomes significant. Small, slow, but then significant. And it takes time. And honestly, a lot of it just has to do with your perspective. Like, am I thinking long term? Am I thinking bigger than myself? But also, am I trying my best to have the mind of Christ? Am I trying to think in terms of what God might be doing? Because I look at a lot of things recently happening even with the evangelical church, and a lot of people chalk it up to a loss. But there's many ways that I'm saddened and grieved, but there's many ways that I'm grateful. I think because I feel like there's been a winnowing, there's been a pruning. I just finished reading Voddie Baucham's book Fault Lines, and I thought it was really helpful, and I'm grateful that, like, for the first time in a while, I can actually, it's like there was like this, God in his providence made it like a mandatory, rule where we all had to put on our jerseys, and we could tell for the first time who was actually on our team. We could tell and that's a great grace to the nation. It's a great grace to the church. It's a great grace to me finally to be able to say, oh, okay, I thought there was something there. It smelled fishy and felt funny, and so it depends on your perspective. Am I thinking outside of myself? Am I thinking outside of even our nation? Am I thinking 10,000 years from now? And because Christ could tarry for 10,000, 40,000, like you've said, we might be in the infant stages still of the church. Am I thinking big? Am I thinking long, small, slow, significant? But then also, am I thinking through the perspective and the mind of God as best I can from his word, and seeing that even in the midst of difficulty and trial, all the graces that he's affording to us that accomplish his will. I mean, the fact that liberalism has kind of just had a heyday these past few years, and I know it's been longer and secular, but the fact that it's really showing its head, man, I look at that and I think, all right, maybe America's done. That doesn't mean anything in terms of the post-mill position being wrong. That America is that's a few points that I don't want us to lose. But so that's one perspective. But then my perspective is, finally the enemy has reared its ugly head and just said, this is how ugly I actually am. You know how I've been sweet and nice for a long time and polite, and this is how bad I really am. I want to take your children away from you. I want to do vaccine passports, and I want to monitor you with this and do And I'm sitting back and I'm like, yeah, this is scary. At the same time, like, thank goodness, because I felt like one of the hardest things to do as a pastor was convince people that there was an enemy, to convince people that there was darkness, that there actually was something like persecution, that there actually was. And now it's like, and so I see like, all right, there's a lot of people who aren't really on our team, and that's a bummer. But then at the same time, it's like the people who are left are awake, and 100 people who are awake and roused and ready to fight are a lot better than 500, that are all taking a nap. And so I feel like the church in America, and those ratios aren't specific, but my point is just to say, I think the church in America is waking up. And yes, in waking up out of our slumber, we're realizing that the church in America isn't as large as we thought it was. The SBC boasts of 15 million people, but you're never going to find them in the pews, much less, and that's just church attendance. You won't even find that many with church attendance, much less, people who are really, really committed to Christ and his word. But the point is, there are still lots of Christians who love Jesus, love his word, recognize false doctrine, have a spine, are willing to stand against these things, and I'm sure you've experienced this, but it just seems like those inquiries they're flooding in. People, kind of almost like the resurgence that happened with Calvinism. It's like now that same kind of, maybe not to that level, but it seems like there is another resurgence now, but with Kuyperianism, with post-millennialism, with engaging culture, with like Christians actually caring about politics for the first time in their lives, and wanting to take a stand and wanting to win the culture. And so all that being said, I feel encouraged, and that kind of gets us to our bonus question. So I'm going to conclude the episode, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Quick thing to that. That's so beautifully stated, brother. And I think what's important people recognize is that there's a lot of course, mischaracterization coming across everyone's bow in terms of talking about somebody else's position. It's a human problem. We all have that problem. We mischaracterize. We need to avoid doing that. Christians have to have the kind of integrity that doesn't allow that sort of a thing in others or in ourselves. But people will mischaracterize postmillennialism in terms of like, wait, I'm looking for the utopia. This does not look like a utopia. Apparently, right. Postmillennialism is wrong. Postmillennialists recognize that Christ's kingdom grows in history through the proclamation of the gospel, and it grows gradually. And we recognize historical judgments. God may judge a people for sinning against God as a nation. He's done it throughout history. He'll continue to do it now. But we recognize that the Bible teaches that the gates of hell will not prevail against Christ's church. Christ's church is the offensive force in history. Gates aren't coming against the church. We are taking them down, and none of them are going to prevail against the church. That's a promise from Jesus. In Jesus' most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, he, of course, references a very popular Old Testament psalm when he says, the meek shall inherit the earth. Well, that's a promise. It's not the unbelievers. It's not the unrighteous that inherit this place. It's the meek that inherit the earth. Think about that. It's not the unrighteous who inherit this place. It's us. But also the promise is, the inspired apostle interprets a promise to Abraham in Romans chapter 4. Paul says, Abraham's descendants would inherit the world. So this world belongs to Jesus. It's God's world. He has all authority in heaven and on earth. It's the meek that inherit the earth. It's not the ungodly. It's God's descendants who inherit the world. And so that's where history is going. And you're right. There's going to be moments of historical judgment and difficulties. But I do want to say this. Some of the attacks on postmillennialism I find amusing and somewhat humorous. When someone looks around and says, well, it doesn't really look like that to me now, I'd say, well, let's look at those scriptures and see what those promises really are. But you're saying that as a 21st century American evangelical with access to the entire globe in your pocket, 24 hours a day, you could do a video and preach the gospel to someone in Zimbabwe or in New Zealand live, globally, instantly. We've got, in the last 150 years, I believe it is, more Christian converts than in the entire history of the church. We've got more professing Christians on earth today than any time in history. We have more access now to bring the gospel to different nations now than we ever did in history. China, people are looking at studies and saying China could be the most Christian nation very soon in our history or in the future. And so when you think about where we're at today, we started with some very confused disciples before Jesus at his ascension.
Right.
Very, very
Right.
confused, sort of like, okay, go win the world. This recently crucified Palestinian Jew who is now raised from the dead says that he's the one who's in charge of the entire world. I think Caesar would have had something to say about that, but that's what Jesus told him. So he says, so on that basis, because it's all mine, it's not Caesar's, it's not that guy over there, because it's mine, because this world is mine, heaven and earth, all my authority, go get the nations. He told that to some confused disciples there before he ascended. A small handful. And now we've got believers all over the planet, and you and I talking to each other. Where are you at now? Texas? You're in Texas right now.
Yeah.
I'm in Arizona talking to each other live, talking about spiritual things, God's word, Christ is King of kings and Lord of lords. What are we losing again?
Right, right.
You know,
Yeah, we went
it's
from
all
11 confused disciples to millions, if not a couple billion, perhaps, Christians in the world. It feels like a win. And I think, you know, the primo person, I would want to push back on, you know, and well, in their defense, actually, they would say, well, hey, we're not in our position. We're not saying that there's going to be less Christians, Jeff. You know, like we think that Christians will grow. And I think this is the big problem. They would have this persuasion that the ranks of Christians will expand and increase. We're going to go from thousands and then maybe millions and this, and we're going to have more and more Christians, but the world is going to get worse and worse. And I think that's what I struggle with. So then what do Christians do? Because to me, it's just more Christians equals better world, period.
the gospel changes things.
And that's why I think the premill position, and maybe it's not the historical, but maybe it's like what you're saying, this novelty that's new really in just the last century or so, this dispensational premill position. That's why I think it almost always coincides, even if it's subconscious, with two kingdom theology. Because that's the only way that you can grow in ranks of Christians. We're going to go from thousands to tens of thousands to millions of more and more Christians, but the world's going to get worse and worse and worse. How can you, I mean, I feel like you have to work to achieve that. Like you would have to be intentional to exponentially grow in not just numbers, because the population may be growing as well, the world, but in terms of percentages, the percentages of Christians in the world increasing, and yet the world getting worse. I feel like that has to be designed, and I think it has been designed. I think it's two kingdom theology. Thanks for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, we hope that you'll take a moment and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can watch more content like this. Also, take a moment and give this video a like so that it can reach more people, and take a moment and click on the bell so that you'll be notified whenever we come out with new content. Thanks so much. God bless.